Knock on my window came at 6:43 in the morning. I know the exact time because I've been staring at the clock on my phone for the past hour, willing myself to get up, get moving, figure out my next step. The battery was at 11%. I had nowhere to plug it in. I was 31 years old and I was living in my car in a Walmart parking lot in Raleigh, North Carolina. When I saw the uniform, my stomach dropped straight to the floor. I sat up fast, my neck aching from sleeping pressed against the door, and tried to look like someone who wasn't doing exactly what I was clearly doing. I smoothed my hair back. I rolled down the window. "Good morning, ma'am." The officer was young, maybe mid-20s, with a neutral expression that gave nothing away. "Can I see your license and registration?" I didn't ask why. You don't ask why when you're sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. You just hand over your documents and hope. My hands were shaking a little as I dug through the glove compartment. I found the registration under a crumpled Wendy's bag and 2 parking tickets I hadn't paid yet. I handed everything over and watched him walk back to his cruiser. I told myself it was nothing, a routine check. Maybe there was a policy about overnight parking I'd violated. I'd move, I'd apologize, I'd find somewhere else. I was not prepared for what happened next. He was gone for almost 8 minutes. I counted. When he came back, his expression had changed. It wasn't suspicious exactly, more careful, like he was choosing his words. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." "Is something wrong?" He paused. "There's a flag on your file. Federal. I need to make a call before we go any further. But I want you to know you're not in any trouble that I can see. I just need you to bear with me for a few minutes." A federal flag on my file. I got out of the car on legs that didn't feel entirely like mine. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the part that came before. The part I'd spent 3 years trying to forget. I grew up in a small town outside of Winston-Salem. My mother raised me and my older brother mostly on her own after my father left when I was 7. We weren't rich, but we weren't desperate either. She worked as an office manager for a dental practice for 22 years. She was practical, organized, and proud. She did not talk about money problems. She did not ask for help. My brother is 4 years older than me. He moved to Charlotte after college, married a woman named, I'll just call her my sister-in-law, because honestly what she did to me is what this is really about. And together they built a life that looked from the outside like everything was fine. I was close to my brother growing up. We had the kind of bond that came from surviving a house that was a little too quiet after our dad left. From eating cereal for dinner on nights our mom worked late. From knowing without saying it out loud that we had to take care of each other. I trusted him completely. That was my first mistake. Not because he's a bad person, exactly, but because he married someone who was, and he chose her over me every single time. I finished my nursing degree at 24 and started working at a hospital in Durham. It wasn't glamorous. Night shifts, difficult patients, a salary that looked reasonable until you subtracted rent and student loans. But I loved the work. I was good at it. I had a plan. At 26, my credit score was 712. I know that because I checked it regularly. I was building something, a future. Not a big one, not a flashy one, just mine. At 28, I found out my brother's wife had been using my social security number for 2 years. I didn't find out the way you'd expect, not from a bank, not from a credit bureau alert. I found out because I tried to refinance my car loan and the lender called me into the office and slid a printout across the desk with an expression I still think about sometimes. The kind of expression that means I'm so sorry this is happening to you, and also I cannot believe this is happening to you. There were 4 credit cards in my name I had never opened. A store card at a furniture retailer, 2 Visa cards through separate banks, a medical credit line. The combined balance was just over $41,000. $41,000. The oldest account had been opened when I was 26, the month after I'd gone to visit them for Thanksgiving and left my purse in their guest bathroom overnight. I sat in that lender's office for a long time. The man across from me said something about fraud alerts and dispute processes, and I heard the words, but they weren't landing. I kept thinking about Thanksgiving. I kept thinking about the spare key my brother had to my apartment. I kept thinking about my sister-in-law's smile when I showed up that weekend, how warm she'd been. how she'd made my favorite pasta and asked me about my job and told me how proud she was of how far I'd come. I confronted my brother that same week. I drove to Charlotte. I didn't call ahead. He answered the door in gym clothes and his face went through about 6 different emotions in 3 seconds when he saw me standing there. His wife appeared behind him almost immediately, which told me she'd been listening. "I know what happened," I said. "I didn't yell. I was too tired to yell. I just want you to explain it to me." What followed was one of the worst conversations of my life. My sister-in-law cried. She said they'd been struggling financially, a bad investment, a contractor who'd taken their money and disappeared. Credit they couldn't get on their own. She said she'd meant to pay it back. She said she never thought it would go this far. She said she was sorry. She was so sorry. She knew it was wrong. She just hadn't known what else to do. My brother put his hand on my shoulder and said, "She's your family. Please don't do this to us. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Don't do this to us." I drove home. I didn't file a police report. I didn't call the banks. I told myself I needed time to think. 3 years later, I was sleeping in a Walmart parking lot and thinking had not helped even a little bit. Here is what happened in between. In the order it happened, I tried to manage the debt on my own. I thought if I worked extra shifts, if I tightened every budget, if I just handled it quietly, everything would be okay. I was protecting my family. I was being loyal. I was being an idiot. The debt grew. Interest is not interested in your family loyalty. A year after I found out, the first card went to collections. My credit score, which I had worked so carefully to build, dropped below 500. I couldn't qualify for an apartment lease on my own anymore. I moved into a room I was renting from a coworker and told myself it was temporary. My mother found out somehow, I still don't know how, whether my brother told her or she saw something, and called me. Her response was not what I expected. She told me that my sister-in-law had been going through a hard time. She told me that family doesn't go to the police on family. She told me I should think very carefully about what kind of person I wanted to be. I hung up and cried in my car for an hour. The coworker I was renting from got engaged and her fiancé moved in and she needed the room back. I had 60 days. I had terrible credit. I had no savings left because I'd been funneling everything into debt that was not mine. I applied for 19 apartments. 17 rejected me on the credit check alone. One accepted me with a cosigner. I didn't have a cosigner. I moved into my car in October. I told myself it was temporary. I kept going to work. I showered at the hospital gym before my shifts. I kept my scrubs clean and my hair neat and nobody knew. Or if they did, they were too polite to say anything. I was 31 years old. I had a nursing degree, a hospital job, and a parking spot at Walmart. So when the officer came back to his cruiser and made a call, and then another call, and then walked back to where I was standing with my arms crossed against the October chill, I was already running through every scenario I could think of. "Ma'am, I'm going to level with you," he said. He had a way of speaking that was direct without being unkind. "There's a federal flag connected to your social security number. It's been there for a while. It looks like it was tied to an ongoing financial fraud investigation. I've got an agent who wants to speak with you. Not about anything you did. They're actually looking for you as a potential witness." A witness. A witness to what? "I'm not authorized to give you details, but they've been trying to locate you. Your last known address was out of date. They didn't know where you were." He paused. "Do you have somewhere you need to be this morning?" I looked at my car. The blanket on the back seat. The duffel bag with my work clothes. The phone at 11%. "No," I said. "I don't have anywhere to be." His name was Agent Carver. He met me at a coffee shop 3 hours later. Not a field office, not an interrogation room, just a Panera near the highway. He was in his 40s, wore a regular suit, and bought me a coffee and a sandwich without making a thing of it, which I appreciated more than I could say. He put a folder on the table between us. "I need to ask you about some accounts that were opened in your name starting around 6 years ago," he said. "Before I do that, I want to tell you that we have strong reason to believe you were a victim in this situation, not a participant. Okay?" I nodded. "We've been investigating your brother's wife for the past 14 months, he said. The credit card fraud was part of a larger pattern. She did this to 3 other people before you, a former coworker, an elderly neighbor, her own aunt. I set down my coffee. The accounts she opened in your name were used to make purchases that were then resold for cash, he continued. Some of that cash went through a small business that your brother was partly involved with. We don't believe he knew the origin of the funds, but that's still under review. She's done this before, I said. It wasn't a question. 4 times that we've confirmed. You're the most recent. He paused. I want to be honest with you. The federal flag on your file was placed there as part of a wider fraud alert. It wasn't specifically targeting you, it was tagging your SSN as connected to an active case. When that happens, it can cause complications. Credit checks, background checks, sometimes law enforcement contacts. I thought about the apartment applications. 19 apartments. Is that why? I stopped. I couldn't finish the sentence. He seemed to understand. Yes, he said quietly. It's likely that flag contributed to some of those complications. We sat there for a second. What do you need from me? I asked. A formal statement. Documentation of any financial impact you can show us, and if you're willing, your cooperation during the prosecution. Will they be charged? Your sister-in-law is already facing federal wire fraud charges, aggravated identity theft. The minimum for identity theft under federal law is a mandatory 2 years, on top of whatever the fraud carries. The DA is also looking at state charges. He folded his hands on the table. The fraudulent debt, the cards, the balances, that will be part of the civil remedy. You should speak to an attorney, but in cases like this, victims typically see that debt discharged and may be entitled to damages. I looked out the window at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan. A kid was pulling at her sleeve. I've been carrying this for 3 years, I said. I thought I was protecting them. Agent Carver didn't say anything for a moment. Then, a lot of people in your position do the same thing. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. That was the first time in 3 years someone with any kind of authority had said those words to me. You didn't do anything wrong. I don't know if he noticed, but I had to look away for a second. I gave my statement that afternoon. It took 4 hours. I walked Agent Carver through everything: the Thanksgiving visit, the guest bathroom, the confrontation in Charlotte, my brother's silence, my mother's phone call. I told him about the apartment applications. I showed him my bank statements going back 3 years, the extra shifts, the slow bleed of money going toward debt that had never been mine, the paralegal assigned to my case, a young woman named Andrea who had the energy of someone who'd seen this exact situation before and was personally offended by it, filed the dispute paperwork with all 4 credit card issuers before the end of the week. Under the Fair Credit Billing Act and the FTC's identity theft provisions, I was entitled to dispute and have removed any fraudulent accounts. Andrea walked me through every step. She made it sound almost simple, which I don't think it was, but she made me feel like it was manageable, and that was enough. Within 6 weeks, all 4 accounts were under formal dispute. Within 4 months, 3 of them had been fully discharged. The 4th took an additional month and a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, but it went to $41,000. Gone, not by me, by the people who actually owed it. My sister-in-law pleaded guilty 8 months after that Panera meeting. Federal wire fraud, 2 counts of aggravated identity theft. She was sentenced to 4 years. The judge noted at sentencing that she had targeted vulnerable individuals, including family members, and that the harm extended well beyond the financial. My brother, and this part is still complicated for me, I won't pretend it isn't, was not charged. There wasn't enough evidence that he knowingly participated, though the investigation made clear he benefited. He called me once, about 3 weeks after the plea. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known the extent of it. I believed him, partially. I also believed he'd looked away because looking directly at it would have required him to choose, and choosing was hard. I didn't hang up on him, but I didn't tell him it was okay either, because it wasn't, and I was done saying things I didn't mean to keep the peace in a family that had never extended me the same courtesy. My mother has not called me since the sentencing. I don't know if that's guilt or anger or something else. I've stopped trying to decode it. That energy doesn't belong to her anymore. My credit score, 8 months after the accounts were discharged, climbed back to 641. It doesn't sound like much. It is everything. It meant I could apply for an apartment and not hold my breath through the credit check. It meant the rejection wasn't already written before I walked in the door. I found a one-bedroom in Durham, 6 minutes from the hospital. It has a small balcony and a window in the kitchen that gets morning light. I put a plant on the sill. It's still alive, which I consider a personal achievement. I went back to work. I kept my nursing license, which had never actually been in jeopardy but which I'd worried about constantly during the worst months, convinced that the financial chaos would somehow contaminate everything else. It didn't. My record at the hospital was clean. My patients didn't know what I'd been carrying. I'd shown up for every shift, and that was what mattered to them. I also, and I want to be honest about this part, started seeing a therapist, not because I was falling apart. I wasn't, not exactly, but because a friend at the hospital told me that what I'd been through had a name. Financial abuse within families. Coercive exploitation. There were frameworks for understanding it, and understanding it turned out to matter a lot. It mattered to know that my instinct to protect them wasn't weakness. It was the result of years of conditioning to put the family unit above my own safety, and that conditioning had been deliberately taken advantage of. That didn't make me a victim forever. It just helped me understand what had happened. There's something nobody tells you about the moment things start to get better. It doesn't feel like relief right away. It feels suspicious. You keep waiting for the next thing to go wrong. You catch yourself calculating how quickly things could fall apart again, running disaster scenarios even on ordinary days, sitting in your new apartment in the morning light and feeling inexplicably like you should be braced for something. It takes time for your nervous system to believe that the emergency is over. I was standing in my kitchen one morning about 6 months after I moved in, making coffee before my shift. The plant was on the sill, the light was coming through. My phone was charging fully because I had an outlet and a charger and an apartment with electricity. I was thinking about nothing in particular, and I realized I hadn't run a disaster scenario in 4 days. It was such a small thing. 4 days. But I stood there and let myself feel it because I had learned, slowly and imperfectly, that the small things were what was actually real. The debt had been real. The car had been real. The $41,000 and the 19 apartment rejections, and the coworker's fiance and the Walmart parking lot at 6:43 in the morning. All of it had been real, and I had lived through every bit of it. The plant on the sill was also real. The coffee was real. The 4 days without catastrophizing were real. I picked up my phone and texted Andrea, the paralegal, because she'd given me her number and said to let her know how I was doing. I just said, the last account officially closed. I'm okay. Thank you for everything. She texted back 3 minutes later. You did the hard part. I just filed the paperwork. I still think about that October morning in the parking lot. The officer's careful expression. The weight of not knowing whether I was in trouble or not. The way my hand shook when I handed over my license. I think about what would have happened if he'd just given me a warning and sent me on my way. If the flag had never triggered. If I'd kept sleeping in my car and going to my shifts and telling myself I was managing, I think I would have eventually filed the police report on my own. I'd like to believe that. I was getting closer to it. The shame was starting to wear thin. But I don't know how much longer it would have taken, or what I would have lost in the meantime. What I know is this: the thing I was most afraid of. Someone finding out how bad it had gotten, how far I'd fallen, what my family had done, and what I'd allowed to continue, turned out to be the thing that saved me. Getting seen, in that parking lot, at my lowest point, started a chain of events that I could not have set in motion on my own. Not because I was incapable, but because I had been so thoroughly convinced that I owed my silence to people who had never once offered me the same protection. I don't owe them my silence anymore. I don't owe them anything. If you're reading this, if you're sitting in your car right now or lying awake running numbers that don't add up, or holding on to something that's hurting you because you think protecting your family is the same as protecting yourself, I want you to hear me. It is not the same thing. It has never been the same thing. You are allowed to protect yourself first. You are allowed to call the bank. You are allowed to file the report. You are allowed to let the people who caused the damage deal with the consequences of the damage, deal with the consequences of the damage they caused. That's not betrayal. That's just the truth. The plant on my windowsill is a pothos. For what it's worth, nearly impossible to kill. It just keeps growing toward the light no matter what. So do I. I used to think loyalty was the same as love. I think a lot of people do, especially when they grow up in families where keeping the peace is treated like the highest virtue anyone can practice. You learn early that rocking the boat has consequences. You learn that the feelings of the group matter more than the truths of any one person inside it. And so when something happens, something devastating, something that should have had you on the phone with the police before the day was out, you stay quiet instead. You tell yourself you're being kind. You tell yourself you're being strong. What I was actually being was afraid. My sister-in-law stole $41,000 from me. She didn't break into my house. She didn't take my wallet. She sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinner and passed me the bread basket and asked about my job. And sometime in the night, or maybe earlier, used information she'd quietly gathered to open 4 credit accounts in my name. She did it deliberately. She did it knowing exactly what it would cost me. And she was counting, correctly, for 3 years, on the fact that I would not report her. She understood something about me that I hadn't fully understood about myself yet, that I had been trained to absorb damage quietly and call it family. The consequences of her choices didn't stay with her. They landed on me, on my credit score, my housing options, my savings, my sleep. Every single night I spent in that parking lot was a direct result of what she chose to do. Not what I failed to do, not what I should have done differently. What she did. That distinction took me a long time to hold clearly, because I'd spent so long turning the blame inward, asking myself why I hadn't acted sooner, why I'd let it go on. But here's what I've come to understand. The people who exploit your loyalty are counting on you to spend your energy blaming yourself. It keeps the focus off them. It keeps you small and apologetic and silent while they go on living their lives unbothered. What broke that cycle for me wasn't a grand moment of courage. It was a parking violation, a routine stop, an officer who ran my plates and triggered a flag I didn't even know existed. The truth came out not because I finally found the strength to force it, but because the consequences of her actions had been accumulating in systems I couldn't see, and eventually those systems caught up with her. That's the thing about actions. They don't disappear because you want them to. They compound. Every choice my sister-in-law made, every account she opened, every purchase she ran through my name, every month she let the interest grow. Those choices were building something. She just assumed she'd be safe from whatever it built. She wasn't. And I, the person sleeping in her car, the person who had quietly absorbed 3 years of damage to protect someone who had never once extended her the same grace. I got to walk out of that Panera with a folder, a legal team, and a path back to myself. I'm not the same person I was in that parking lot. I don't think I'd want to be. That person was trying so hard to be good that she'd forgotten she was also allowed to be whole. You can love your family and still refuse to be their casualty. You can want peace and still insist on the truth. Those things are not opposites. They never were. The pothos on my windowsill grows toward the light whether or not the conditions are perfect. It doesn't negotiate with the dark. It just keeps moving. I've been trying to do the same.